They seem to be— In that case, we may be all X, Brandon interrupted, brandishing his pipe vigorously. We know that they're on a beam. Apparently, we're the only ones hereabouts having cosmic power. If we can keep away from them until their beam attenuates, we can whittle them down to our size and then take them, no matter how much accumulator capacity they've got. "But can we keep away from them that long?" asked Dol Kinor pointedly, and his fellow Venerian also had a question to propound. "Would it not be preferable to lead them in a wide circle, back to a rendezvous with the space fleet, which will probably be ready by the time of the meeting?" "I'm afraid that would be useless." Westfall frowned in thought. "Given power, that fortress could destroy the entire fleet almost as easily as she could wipe out the Sirius alone." "Kinor's right." Stephen spoke up from the calculator. "You're getting too far ahead of the situation. We aren't apt to keep ahead of them long enough to do much leading anywhere. The Titanians can hold a beam together from Saturn to Jupiter. Why can't these snake folks?" "Several reasons," Brandon argued stubbornly. "First place, look at the mass of that thing, and remember that the heavier the beam, the harder it is to hold it together. Second, there's no evidence that they wander around much in space. If their beams are designed principally for travel upon Jupiter, why should they have any extraordinary range? I say they can't hold that beam forever. We've got a good long lead, and in spite of their higher acceleration, I think we'll be able to keep out of range of their heavy stuff. If so, we'll trace a circle, only one a good deal bigger than the one Aminar suggested, and meet the fleet at a point where that enemy ship will be about out of power." Thus for hours the scientists argued, agreeing upon nothing, while the Vorkulian fortress crept ever closer. At the end of 3 days of the mad flight, the pursuing spaceship was in plain sight, covering hundreds of divisions of the micrometer screens. But now the size of the images was increasing with extreme slowness, and the scientists of the Sirius watched with strained attention the edges of those glowing green pictures. Finally, when the pictured edges were about to cease moving across the finely ruled lines, Brandon cut down his own acceleration a trifle, and kept on decreasing it at such a rate that the heptagon still crept up, foot by foot. "Hey, what's the big idea?" Stevens demanded. "Coax 'em along. If we run away from them, they'll probably reverse power and go back home, won't they? Their beam is falling apart fast, but they're still getting so much stuff along it that we couldn't do a thing to stop 'em. If they think that we're losing power even faster than they are, though, they'll keep after us until their beam's so thin that they'll just be able to stop on it. Then they'll reverse or else go on to their accumulators. Reverse, probably, since they'll be a long ways from home by that time. We'll reverse, too, and keep just out of range. Then, when we both have stopped and are about to start back, their beam will be at its minimum, and we'll go to work on 'em. Foot, horse, and marines. Nobody can run us as ragged as they have been doing and get away with it as long as I'm conscious, and stand a chance in the world of hanging one onto their chins in retaliation. I've got a hunch. If it works, we can take those birds alone, and take 'em so they'll stay took. We might as well break up. This is going to be an ordinary job of piloting for a few days, I think. I'm going up and work with the Martians on that hunch. You fellows work out any ideas you want to. Watch 'em close, Mac. Keep kidding 'em along, but don't let 'em get close enough to puncture us." Everything worked out practically as Brandon had foretold, and a few days later, their acceleration somewhat less than terrestrial gravity, he called another meeting in the control room. He came in grinning from ear to ear, accompanied by the 2 Martians, and seated himself at his complex power panel. "Now watch the professor closely, gentlemen," he invited. "He is going to cut that beam." "But you can't," protested Pyraz Aminar. "I know you can't, ordinarily, when a beam is tight and solid. But that beam's as loose as ashes right now. I told you I had a hunch, and Alcantro and Fidanza worked out the right answer for me. If I can cut it, Quince, and if their screens go down for a minute, shoot your Visiray into them and see what you can see. All X, how much power are you going to draw? Plenty. It figures a little better than 400,000 kilofrancs. I'll draw it all from the accumulators so as not to disturb you fellows on the cosmic intake. We don't care if we do run the batteries down some, but I don't want to hold that load on the bus bars very long. However, if my hunch is right, I won't be on that beam 5 minutes before it's cut from Jupiter, and I'll bet you $4 that you won't see the original crew in that fort when you get into it." He set the upper and lower bands of dirigible projectors to apply a powerful sidewise thrust, and the Sirius darted off her course. Flashing a minute pencil behind the huge heptagon, Brandon manipulated his tuning circuits until a brilliant spot in space showed him that he was approaching resonance with the heptagon's power beam. Micrometer dials were then engaged, and the delicate tuning continued until the meters gave evidence that the two beams were precisely synchronized and exactly opposite in phase. 4 plunger switches closed, that tiny pilot ray became an enormous rod of force, and as those two gigantic beams met in exact opposition and neutralized each other, a solid wall of blinding brilliance appeared in the empty ether behind the Vorkulian fortress. As that dazzling wall sprang into being, the sparkling green protection died from the walls of the heptagon. "Go to it, Quince!" Brandon yelled, but the suggestion was entirely superfluous. Even before the wall screen had died, Westfall's beam was trying to get through it, and when the Visiray revealed the interior of the heptagon, the quiet and methodical physicist was shaken from his habitual calm. "Why, they aren't the winged monsters at all! They're Hexans!" he exclaimed. "Sure they are." Brandon did not even turn his heavily goggled eyes from the blazing blankness of his own screen. "That was my hunch. Those snakes went about things in a businesslike fashion. They didn't strike me as being folks who would pull off such a wild stunt as trying to chase us clear out of the solar system, but a gang of Hexans would do just that. Some of them must have captured that ship, and, already having it in their cockeyed brains that we were back of what happened on Callisto, they decided to bump us off if it was the last thing they ever did. That's what I'd do myself if I were a Hexan. Now, I'll tell you what's happening back at the home power plant of that ship, and what's going to happen next. I'm kicking up a horrible row out there with my interference, and a lot of instruments at the other end of that beam must be cutting up all kinds of didos right now. They'll check up on that ship with the expedition, by radio and whatnot, and when they find out that it's clear out here, chop. Didn't get to see much, did you? No, they must have switched over to their accumulators almost instantly. Yeah, but if they've got accumulator capacity enough to hold off our entire cosmic intake and get back to Jupiter besides, I'm a polyp. We're going to take that ship, fellows, and learn a lot of stuff we never dreamed of before. Ha! There goes his beam. Pay me the 4, Quince." The dazzling wall of incandescence had blinked out without warning, and Brandon's beam bore on through space unimpeded. He shut it off and turned to his fellows with a grin which disappeared instantly as a thought struck him, and he leaped back to his board. "Sound the high acceleration warning quick, Perce," he snapped, and drove in switch after switch. "Cosmic intake's gone down to 0, exclaimed MacDonald as the Sirius leaped away. "Had to cut it. They might shoot a jolt through that band. Just thought of something. Maybe unnecessary, but no harm done if—" "It's necessary. All X. We're taking a sweet kissing right now. You see, even though we're at a pretty long range, they've got some horrible projectors, and they were evidently mad enough to waste some power taking a good, solid flash at us. And if we hadn't been expecting it, that flash would have been a bountiful sufficiency, believe me. Great cat! Look at that meter! And I've got to throw in number 10 shunt. The outer screen is drawing 540,000. They stared at the